Since 2010, we've been seeing the following pattern. Republicans win a majority of seats in a state legislature. Then, in the name of cracking down on voter fraud, the Republican-led legislature crafts laws restricting voting rights in their state, laws that mostly affect constituencies that traditionally vote for Democrats. Funny how that happens. Then the state's governor signs the bill, if he or she is a Republican, or vetoes the bill if he or she is a Democrat. That is how it tends to go. For example, in New Hampshire, the Democratic Governor John Lynch tried to be a one-man bulwark against the voter ID tide by vetoing a law passed by the Republican-controlled legislature in his state. That law would have required voters to show a photo ID or sign something called a qualified voter affidavit, a form that some election officials feared could take voters a long time to fill out, causing chaos and lines at the heavily affected polling places. Last week, New Hampshire lawmakers changed that affidavit requirement into something simpler and overrode Lynch's veto, making New Hampshire the latest state to require a photo ID. New Hampshire Republicans, in other words, made voting harder. Wisconsin Republicans also made voting harder last year. And it's well into the next step of the process, the inevitable court challenge, which is how we got to know Ruthelle Frank. You remember her? Miss Frank is in her mid-80s, a member of the town board where she lives, and a lifelong Wisconsin voter. Ruthelle Frank is also one of many people who would lose her ability to vote under Wisconsin's new law. For Miss Frank, the problem was that she does not have a birth certificate or a driver's license, and the state told her she would have to spend up to $200 getting the right paperwork so she can meet the new requirements for doing what she's done all her adult life, going to the polls to vote. Ruthelle Frank is the plaintiff in a lawsuit against the new Wisconsin voter ID law, one of 3 legal challenges filed against it. And the governor of Wisconsin, who signed away her ability to vote, Scott Walker, has been defending that law in court. In May, 2 state lawmakers tried to sign on, too, saying they also wanted to help defend the state's new law to make voting harder. They personally wanted to join in the pile-on. Only these 2 elected officials would not say how they were paying to join the case. They didn't say where the money to pay the attorneys was coming from, which is an ethics problem, actually, since state officials cannot accept outside help like free legal services. One of the lawmakers said he could not comment because he did not know who was paying for the legal work. Well, you know what? Mystery solved. And it wasn't the butler who did it. It was the Republican National Committee. A spokesperson admitted that the RNC was footing the bill all along and defended the national group's involvement in a state issue as, quote, a common-sense way to ensure confidence in the state's voting system. Oh, isn't that nice of them? So, mystery solved in Wisconsin. Powerful people are heavily involved in an effort to consolidate their power. Nothing unusual to see here. It's human history. But it's happening in Pennsylvania, too. And they're not even trying to hide what's going on. Last week, it emerged the state's House Majority Leader, a Republican named Mike Turzai, made a telling admission at a weekend meeting of the Republican State Committee. He said it while listing his party's recent accomplishments.
Pro-Second Amendment, the Castle Doctrine's done. First pro-life legislation, abortion facility regulations in 22 years, done. Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania, done.
And there it is, all spelled out. Making Pennsylvania voters show ID they never had to show before will allow Governor Romney to win Pennsylvania. I think he meant to say protect the integrity of the vote. Dude, you have to keep up appearances on this stuff. But that's what we're seeing a lot. That is the trend here. In fact, since the red tide elections of 2010, we have seen 180 bills to make voting harder. 16 states have actually passed laws to do that, including New Hampshire. Together, these states represent nearly 80% of the electoral votes needed to win the White House this year, which makes today's news from Michigan somewhat startling. Michigan's Republican governor, Rick Snyder, was handed a Republican-crafted package of election laws, and he vetoed it today. At least some of it. Today, Governor Snyder struck down 3 bills, one requiring voters to check a box affirming they are citizens, one adding new eligibility requirements for groups that register voters, and one requiring absentee voters to show a photo ID. The governor criticized the laws for creating confusion and declared, quote, voting rights are precious and we need to work especially hard to make it possible for people to vote. Which means that today in Michigan, the normal script got flipped. And the happy reaction quotes came from left-leaning voter rights groups, and the disappointed quotes came from Republican legislators like House Speaker Jace Bolger, whose spokesman went straight to the boogeyman well with this response to one of the vetoes. Quote, People who believe they are registering to vote should have confidence in the process so they know their registrations are being handled properly. Antics by unscrupulous groups such as Acorn, have proven that protecting the voter registration process is vital if we hope to preserve the integrity of ballots cast by every eligible voter. Except that preserving the integrity of ballots thing, that is what Governor Snyder is getting in trouble with his own party for today. So the question is, how many other GOP governors are willing to risk trouble in their party to protect the essential right that protects democracy?